A seat in first class is more than just a comfortable chair. It's a symbol of success, a reward for hard work. For Dr. Annalise Williams, it was supposed to be the start of a career-defining trip. But for one flight attendant, the sight of a black woman in that seat was an offense that couldn't be tolerated. In a shocking display of power and prejudice, she had Dr. Williams publicly removed from the aircraft. The cabin door was sealed, the engine spooled up, and the flight attendant smirked in victory. But then a strange thing happened. The brand-new state-of-the-art airliner simply refused to fly, and the only person on Earth who could fix it was sitting back in the terminal, holding a worthless boarding pass. The scent of premium leather and freshly brewed coffee greeted Dr. Annalise Williams as she stepped across the threshold into the first-class cabin of Global Atlantic Airways Flight 884. It was a scent she had earned. Years of grueling study, sleepless nights, running simulations, and breaking through countless barriers had led her to this moment. At 34, she was a senior aerospace engineer at a leading technology firm, holding patents on the very flight control systems used in this brand-new Airbus A350. The conference in Frankfurt was the pinnacle of her career so far. She was the keynote speaker. This ticket wasn't a luxury. It was a necessity, a space to review her notes and arrive rested and ready. She found her seat 2A, a spacious pod by the window. She slid her sleek carbon fiber briefcase under the ottoman and settled into the plush seat, its cool surface a welcome relief. She was about to take out her noise-cancelling headphones when a crisp, almost sharp voice cut through the cabin's quiet murmur. "Can I help you?" Annalise looked up. A flight attendant with a severe blonde bob, immaculate makeup, and a name tag that read Heather stood over her. Her smile was a perfect painted-on curve that didn't reach her cold, pale blue eyes. It wasn't a question of assistance. It was a challenge. "I'm fine, thank you," Annalise replied, her own smile genuine and warm. "Just getting settled." Heather's gaze flickered from Annalise's face to her boarding pass, which lay on the small cocktail table. Then her eyes did a slow, deliberate sweep of Annalise's attire, a stylish but professional pantsuit, before returning to her face. The look was infinitesimally small, a micro-expression of disbelief and suspicion that lasted less than a second, but for Annalise it was as loud as a klaxon. She had seen that look 1,000 times before. In boardrooms, at academic mixers, even at the parent-teacher meetings for her nephew. It was the look that questioned her right to be in a space she had every right to occupy. "First class is fully booked today," Heather stated, as if Annalise were a lost tourist who had wandered into the wrong section. "Yes, I'm looking forward to the flight," Annalise said, keeping her voice even and pleasant. She refused to let this woman's prejudice tarnish the moment. Heather lingered for a moment longer, her silence a heavy blanket of disapproval. She then turned her attention to a white businessman in the seat across the aisle, her entire demeanor transforming. "Mr. Peterson, welcome back. Can I get you started with a glass of champagne or sparkling water?" Her voice was now syrupy sweet, dripping with deference. Annalise took a deep breath, turning to watch the ground crew scurrying around the aircraft below. She wouldn't let it get to her. She was Dr. Annalise Williams. She designed the literal brains of this magnificent machine. She belonged here. As the boarding process continued, Heather seemed to make a point of ignoring Annalise while fawning over the other passengers in the cabin. She refilled glasses, offered warm towels, and laughed at jokes, creating a little bubble of bonhomie that pointedly excluded seat 2A. When it was time to take pre-departure drink orders, Heather addressed every passenger by name, reading from her tablet. When she reached Annalise, she stopped, her professional veneer cracking slightly. "And you in 2A," she said, her tone flat. "What would you like? I'll have a sparkling water with lime, please." "Thank you, Heather," Annalise replied, making a point to use her name, a gentle reminder that she was paying attention, that she was a person, not a seat number. Heather's lips tightened. She turned away without another word and returned several minutes later, placing the glass on the table with a little more force than necessary. There was no lime. Annalise didn't say a word. She simply picked up her glass and took a sip, her eyes calm and steady. She knew this game. The key was not to play. The more she reacted, the more justification Heather would feel she had for her hostility. She would be the picture of a perfect passenger, polite, quiet, and unobtrusive. Just as the final passenger boarded a man in a tailored suit, settled into seat 3A, behind Annalise, he leaned forward slightly. "Excuse me," he said, his voice a low, cultured baritone. "I couldn't help but notice. That was remarkably unprofessional." Annalise turned slightly, offering a small, appreciative smile. He was an older gentleman, with silver hair and a kind face. "I'm sure she's just having a busy day." The man who introduced himself as Robert Sterling, a corporate lawyer, shook his head. "No, I know exactly what I saw. I've seen it in boardrooms and in courtrooms. It's an abuse of a tiny bit of power, and it's ugly." His validation was a small comfort, a reminder that she wasn't imagining things. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling. I'm Annalise." "A pleasure, Annalise," he replied. "Let's hope her day improves." The cabin door was closed, the safety video began to play, and the A350 pushed back from the gate at JFK International Airport. Annalise felt the familiar gentle vibration as the twin Rolls-Royce engines spooled to life. It was a sound she knew intimately, a symphony of controlled power she had helped orchestrate. She closed her eyes, ready to put the unpleasantness behind her and focus on the journey ahead. But Heather Vance was not finished. The real battle Annalise was about to discover had only just begun. As the aircraft taxied towards the runway, Heather began her final cabin check. She moved with a practiced, almost militaristic efficiency, checking seatbelts and ensuring window shades were open. When she arrived at Annalise's seat, she paused. Annalise had her briefcase on the seat next to her, having just retrieved her tablet. "Ma'am, that bag needs to be stowed for takeoff," Heather said, her voice devoid of any warmth. It was a standard request, but her tone made it sound like an accusation. "Of course," Annalise replied immediately. "I was just getting my tablet out. I'll put it away right now." She reached down to slide the briefcase back under the ottoman. As she did, Heather's eyes narrowed on the briefcase itself. It was a high-end technical case, not a designer handbag. "What's in the bag?" Heather asked abruptly. The question was so out of line that it took Annalise a moment to process. "Excuse me." "Your bag," Heather repeated, gesturing with a sharp flick of her wrist. "The contents. Is there anything in there that shouldn't be large electronics, unapproved devices?" The implication was clear. A bag like that in the hands of a woman like her must be suspicious. Annalise felt a hot flash of anger, but she forced it down, replacing it with icy calm. "It's a briefcase," she stated simply. "It contains my laptop, a tablet, and paperwork, all of which are FAA approved for carriage." She met Heather's gaze directly. "Is there a problem?" The directness of the question seemed to momentarily fluster Heather. Robert Sterling in the seat behind cleared his throat loudly, a clear signal that he was listening and disapproved. Heather's eyes darted towards him, and a flicker of something, perhaps a warning to herself, crossed her face. She couldn't push this too far without a more concrete reason. She backed down, but only slightly. "All bags must be completely under the ottoman, ma'am, not touching the aisle." She watched with an eagle eye as Annalise pushed the case a final unnecessary inch. Satisfied she had asserted her authority, Heather moved on. Once the plane was in the air and the seatbelt sign was switched off, the tension in the cabin should have eased. Instead, Heather seemed intent on escalating it. The meal service began, and once again she took the orders of every passenger around Annalise with painstaking politeness before arriving at her seat. "For your meal selection," she began, consulting her tablet. "Did you pre-order a special meal?" The question was innocent enough, but the subtext was thick with insinuation that Annalise might be trying to get something she wasn't entitled to. "No, I did not," Annalise said. "I'll have the pan-seared salmon, please." Heather tapped at her tablet with a long, manicured finger. I'm afraid the salmon is very popular. I'm not sure we have any left. I can offer you the vegetarian pasta." Annalise knew for a fact that this was a lie. She had seen the passenger in 1A, who ordered after her in the sequence, receive the salmon. More importantly, airlines almost always catered extra first-class meals precisely to avoid this situation. This was a deliberate slight, a petty power play, designed to diminish her. This time she decided not to let it slide. "That's interesting," Annalise said, her voice still quiet, but now edged with steel. "Could you please double-check? I would be very surprised if a flight of this standing ran out of its main fish entree before reaching the second row." Heather's smile became a thin, brittle line. "I can assure you I know my inventory. It's the pasta or the chicken." Before Annalise could respond, Robert Sterling leaned forward again. "Flight attendant," he said, his voice carrying the easy authority of a man used to being listened to. "My apologies for interrupting, but I pre-ordered the salmon and have decided I'm not very hungry. Please give my meal to this lady. I'll just have a bread roll." He was, of course, lying masterfully, but his intervention had cornered Heather. To refuse would be to admit her own lie and create an even bigger scene. Her face flushed a blotchy red. She stared at Mr. Sterling for a beat, then spun on her heel without a word and marched back to the galley. Minutes later, a different flight attendant, a younger man with a kind face, appeared at Annalise's side. He placed the salmon in front of her. "Dr. Williams," he said softly. "My apologies for the mix-up. Please enjoy your meal." He then went to Mr. Sterling's seat and with a knowing wink produced another salmon dish. "And Mr. Sterling, we found an extra for you, after all." The younger attendant's kindness only highlighted Heather's malice. She had been overruled by a colleague and exposed by a passenger. The humiliation Annalise suspected would not be forgotten. She ate her meal, a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. This was no longer about bad service. This was a targeted campaign of harassment, and she feared what Heather's next move would be. Her fear was justified. After the meal trays were cleared, Heather made her way back to Annalise's seat. She was no longer trying to hide her animosity. Her face was a mask of cold fury. "I need to see your boarding pass again," she demanded, holding out her hand. "And your identification." Annalise blinked. "Is there a problem with my ticket?" "There appears to be a discrepancy in our system." Heather lied, her voice sharp. "We have this seat listed as unassigned on our internal manifest. It's likely a system glitch, but I need to verify that you are the correct passenger." This was a blatant, outrageous falsehood. The gate agent had scanned her pass. The younger attendant had addressed her by name. Heather was inventing a pretext, a justification for what she was about to do. Annalise calmly reached into her purse, retrieved her passport, and handed it over, along with the boarding pass from the side table. "Here you are, Dr. Annalise Williams, seat 2A. Heather took the documents and scrutinized them. She stared at the passport photo, then at Annalise's face, her expression one of deep theatrical suspicion, as if she were a customs agent uncovering a master forger. "This is highly unusual," Heather said loudly, ensuring the passengers around them could hear. "A last-minute booking into first class with a corporate discount code that doesn't seem to be validating properly. I'm going to have to take these to the flight deck to have the captain verify them." It was an act of pure public humiliation. Annalise felt the stares of the other passengers. She was being singled out, her legitimacy questioned in front of an entire cabin. The shame was a physical sensation, hot and prickly on her skin. "That will not be necessary," Annalise said, her voice trembling slightly despite her efforts to control it. "My ticket was booked 3 months ago by my employer's corporate travel agency. There is no discrepancy. I suggest you check your system again." "Are you telling me how to do my job?" Heather snapped, her voice rising. "You are becoming disruptive, ma'am. I need you to remain calm." It was a classic tactic accuse the victim of the very behavior you are provoking. Annalise sat back, her hands clenched into fists in her lap. She knew that any further protest would be twisted and used against her. She had to trust that the system, the captain, the truth would prevail. It was a trust that in a few short minutes would be profoundly, devastatingly broken. Heather returned from the cockpit, not with an apology but with a verdict. Her stride was triumphant, her expression set in a mask of grim satisfaction. She was no longer just a flight attendant. In her mind, she was an agent of order restoring the cabin to its rightful state. "Ma'am," she began, her voice ringing with false authority. "I've spoken with the captain. Due to the ticketing discrepancy and your uncooperative and agitated behavior, the captain has authorized me to ask you to move to a seat in the main cabin." The sheer audacity of the lie stole Annalise's breath. Agitated, uncooperative. She had been nothing but polite and composed in the face of escalating harassment. This wasn't about a ticket. It was a punishment for daring to challenge her. "Absolutely not," Annalise stated, her voice low and firm. "I am a ticketed first-class passenger in my assigned seat. I have not been disruptive. You are the one who has been harassing me since I stepped on this plane. I would like to speak to the captain directly." "The captain is busy preparing for our transatlantic crossing," Heather retorted smoothly. "He doesn't speak to passengers during flight unless it's a security emergency, and your refusal to comply is quickly turning this into one." Robert Sterling shot up from his seat. "This is outrageous. I am a witness to this entire exchange. This passenger has been a model of decorum. You, on the other hand, have been hostile and unprofessional. If anyone is being disruptive, it is you. I demand to speak to the captain as well. My name is Robert Sterling, and I am a senior partner at Sterling, Cromwell and Finch." The mention of a powerful law firm gave Heather a moment's pause, but she had gone too far to retreat. Her credibility, her very authority on this flight, was now on the line. She saw Annalise not as a passenger, but as a threat to be neutralized. "Sir, I must ask you to return to your seat and not interfere," Heather said, her voice hardening. "This is a crew matter." She turned her full attention back to Annalise. "Ma'am, this is your final chance. We have an open seat, 24B in economy. I will escort you there now. If you refuse, the captain has instructed me that upon landing in Frankfurt, you will be met by authorities for interfering with a flight crew." The threat hung in the air, thick and poisonous. Being arrested in a foreign country, the damage to her reputation, the potential ruin of the conference she was meant to headline, it all flashed before Annalise's eyes. Heather had backed her into an impossible corner. A public fight would only serve to validate Heather's fabricated claims of her being disruptive. Annalise looked around the cabin. Some passengers stared with open curiosity, others with pity. A few deliberately looked away, not wanting to be involved. She felt utterly alone, stripped of her dignity and status. The doctorate, the patents, the keynote speech, none of it mattered here. In this metal tube, 35,000 feet in the air, she was just a black woman being put in her place by a white woman with a uniform. With a heavy heart, she made her decision. A scene would accomplish nothing. Her victory would have to come later, on the ground, through official channels. "Fine," she said the word, tasting like ash. Her voice was quiet, devoid of emotion. "I will not have my reputation jeopardized by your baseless accusations. I will move." Heather's lips curved into a triumphant smirk. "A wise decision. Please gather your personal belongings." Annalise stood up, her movement stiff. She pulled her briefcase from under the ottoman and took her coat from the hanger. The silence in the cabin was deafening. Every eye was on her as she followed Heather out of the sanctuary of first class, through the curtain into the bustling, cramped aisles of premium economy, and then further back into the main cabin. It was a walk of shame. She passed hundreds of faces, each one a silent observer of her humiliation. Heather led her to 24B, a middle seat wedged between a sleeping man and a teenager blasting music through his headphones. The space was a fraction of what she had left. Her knees pressed against the seat in front of her. "Enjoy the rest of your flight," Heather said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. She turned and walked away, her back straight, her victory complete. Annalise sank into the seat, the reality of the situation washing over her in a cold wave. Tears of anger and frustration pricked at her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She would not give Heather the satisfaction. She stared blankly at the seat back in front of her. The hum of the engines no longer a comfort, but a mocking reminder of the technology she had helped create, now carrying her toward her destination in utter disgrace. Back in first class, a heavy silence lingered. Robert Sterling was incandescent with rage. He immediately took out his phone connected to the plane's Wi-Fi and began composing a detailed, scathing email to Global Atlantic's CEO General Counsel and entire board of directors whose names he knew from previous corporate dealings. He documented every microaggression, every lie, every abuse of power he had witnessed. He knew this single flight attendant was about to become a multi-million-dollar liability for the airline. The karma he vowed would be swift, and it would be brutal. But none of them, not even Sterling, could have predicted the strange immediate form that karma was about to take. The A350, christened the Spirit of Innovation, continued its climb over the Atlantic. In the first-class galley, Heather Vance was preening. She recounted a sanitized version of the events to the other flight attendants, painting herself as a hero who had de-escalated a situation with a difficult and potentially fraudulent passenger. She had restored order. She had protected the sanctity of her cabin. But as the plane reached its cruising altitude of 38,000 feet, something unusual happened. A single amber light flickered to life on the captain's main instrument panel. It was a small light, but its implications were enormous. FEDEC 2 fault. In the cockpit, Captain David Chen and his first officer, a young but capable pilot named Samuel Kent, exchanged a look. FADEC Full Authority. Digital Engine Control. It was the sophisticated computer system that controlled every aspect of the engine's performance, from fuel flow to thrust output. It was the engine's brain. A fault in one of the redundant channels was not catastrophic. That's why there were backups. But it was serious. It was like getting a check engine light on a brand new Ferrari. It simply shouldn't happen. Run the checklist for FADEC 2 fault. Captain Chen said, his voice calm and measured. He was a veteran of 25 years, a man who had seen everything from engine failures to sudden decompression. Panic was not in his vocabulary. Samuel pulled up the electronic checklist on his display. They went through the procedures methodically. Reset the channel. Check the engine parameters. Monitor for fluctuations. For a few minutes, the light extinguished. A collective unspoken sigh of relief filled the cockpit. Probably just a sensor glitch. But 10 minutes later, the light came back on. This time, it was accompanied by a second, more alarming notification on the EIKS engine indicating and crew alerting system display. FADEC 2 mismatch. Okay, now, I don't like that, Samuel said, his brow furrowed. Mismatch with what? Captain Chen's hands moved deftly across the controls, pulling up deeper diagnostic pages. It's showing a parameter conflict with the primary channel on engine 2. It thinks the engine is operating at 85% thrust, but the primary channel says 84.8%. It's a tiny difference, but the system is flagging it as a major inconsistency. He keyed his microphone. Pan. Global Atlantic 8884 calling Gander Control. We have a minor engine control issue, declaring pan for priority handling, requesting immediate return to JFK. Declaring pan was one step below a mayday. It signaled a state of urgency, not immediate danger. But the protocol for an unresolved engine issue over the Atlantic was clear turn back. You don't cross an ocean with a question mark hanging over one of your engines. Gander. Oceanic Control cleared them for a 180-degree turn. As the massive aircraft banked gracefully back towards the North American coast, Captain Chen got on the PA system. Folks, this is your captain speaking. We seem to be having a minor technical indication with one of our engines. The engine itself is operating perfectly, but the computer system that monitors it is giving us some conflicting information. Out of an abundance of caution, we are turning back to JFK, where we can have our maintenance teams take a look. We apologize for the inconvenience and will update you as soon as we have more information. A collective groan went through the cabin. Delays were common, but a full turn back an hour into a transatlantic flight was a major disruption. In first class, Heather's triumphant mood evaporated, replaced by the familiar annoyance of dealing with disgruntled high-value passengers. Back in seat 24B, Annalise heard the captain's announcement. A tiny, purely academic part of her brain sparked with interest. A FADEC fault on a new Rolls-Royce Trent XWB engine. Highly unusual. The system had triple redundancy and some of the most robust software protocols in the industry. She would know. She had helped write them. She felt a strange, detached curiosity about the specific nature of the fault code. The flight back to New York was tense. The amber FADEC light blinked on and off intermittently, a stubborn, taunting little star in the cockpit. By the time they landed back at JFK, 3 hours after they had departed, the entire flight crew was on edge. The plane taxied not to a gate, but to a remote hard stand, where a team of airline maintenance technicians was already waiting. The passengers were told they would be deplaning via air stairs and bussed to the terminal. The flight was for now indefinitely delayed. As they waited for the stairs to arrive, Captain Chen got on the line with the lead maintenance technician, on the ground, a grizzled veteran named Frank Miller. "Frank, it's Dave Chen on the 884. We've got a persistent FADEC 2 mismatch fault on the starboard engine. We ran the checklist, did 2 resets. No joy. It keeps coming back." Frank's voice crackled back over the radio. "Yeah, we saw the codes coming off the live data feed, Dave. We've never seen this specific fault string before. It's not in the manual. We're talking to the folks at Airbus and Rolls-Royce in Toulouse and Derby right now. But with the time difference, it's slow going. This isn't a simple part swap. This sounds like a software ghost." A software ghost? The word sent a chill down Captain Chen's spine. A mechanical problem was straightforward. You replace the broken part. A software problem could be anything. A single line of bad code buried in millions of lines of programming. Finding it could take days. The flight to Frankfurt was as good as cancelled. The logistical and financial fallout would be immense, hundreds of hotel vouchers to booked flights, and a multi-million-dollar aircraft sitting useless on the tarmac. Frustrated Captain Chen disconnected the call and ran a hand over his tired face. Through the cockpit window he could see the passengers deplaning their silhouettes dark against the bright tarmac lights. A flight that had begun with a simple passenger dispute had morphed into a technical nightmare. The 2 events were entirely unrelated, of course, just a stroke of terrible coincidental luck. Or so he thought. The atmosphere in the Global Atlantic Operations Center at JFK was thick with stress. A cancelled A350 flight was a crisis. It created a domino effect, disrupting schedules across the airline's most profitable international routes. Cynthia Hayes, the vice president of JFK Operations, was in the room, her face a thundercloud. "What's the status?" she demanded, directing her question at Frank Miller, who was now on a conference call with engineers in Europe. "They're as stumped as we are, Cynthia," Frank said, covering the phone's mouthpiece. "The fault code X734 Alpha. It's a deep-level logic error in the FADEC's cross-channel validation protocol. It's an edge case they theorized about, but have never seen in the wild. The engineers in the UK are saying the only person who really understands the intricacies of this specific subroutine is the lead project engineer who designed it. They're trying to reach her." "We'll get her on a plane," Cynthia snapped. "I don't care where she is. Fly her here. We're losing $200,000 for every hour this plane sits on the ground." "They're working on it," Frank said grimly. "Apparently she's based out of Seattle. Best case she's here by morning." Captain Chen, having completed his post-flight duties, entered the tense room. "Any luck?" Frank shook his head. "We're grounded until we can get the lead software architect for this system on the line. Some genius-level engineer out of Seattle." While they spoke, a junior operations agent in the corner was methodically performing a routine task cross-referencing the passenger manifest with the airline's high-value customer database to process compensation packages. He typed in the names from the first-class cabin first. When he got to seat 2A, he paused. The name Annalise Williams was flagged with a corporate account. He clicked it open to see the details. His eyes widened. He stood up and walked tentatively over to the group of senior managers. "Excuse me, Ms. Hayes, Mr. Miller," he said, his voice hesitant. "This is probably nothing, but it's weird." Cynthia turned annoyed at the interruption. "What is it, Kevin?" "The passenger who was originally in seat 2A, Kevin said, holding out his tablet. "Dr. Annalise Williams. I was just looking at her corporate travel profile. Look at her employer and her job title." Frank and Cynthia leaned in. On the screen next to Annalise's name were the words, Employer Aero Digital Flight Solutions, title. Senior Project Engineer, Propulsion Control. Systems. Frank Miller read the title and his blood ran cold. Aero Digital Flight Solutions was the elite firm that Rolls-Royce had contracted to design the FADEC software for the Trent XWB engine. He stared at the name, then back at the operations board. The engineer from Seattle. Frank whispered, his voice full of disbelief. The one they're trying to find. What was her name again? He scrambled for his notes from the call with the UK team. He found the email chain. And there it was, in black and white. Lead architect Dr. Annalise Williams. The room fell into a stunned, bottomless silence. The one person in the world they needed, the one expert who could solve their multi-million-dollar flight grounding nightmare, had been on the plane. She was here, at this airport. Cynthia Hayes felt a wave of nausea. Where is this passenger now? She asked, her voice dangerously quiet. Kevin, the junior agent, scrolled down. My system shows her ticket was reissued mid-flight. To seat 24B. He kept scrolling. And there's a crew report logged against her, filed by lead flight attendant Heather Vance. Accusation disruptive behavior and ticketing discrepancy. Recommended action removal from first-class cabin. The full catastrophic reality of the situation crashed down upon them. They hadn't just inconvenienced a passenger. They had humiliated and ejected the one person who held the key to fixing their grounded aircraft. Captain Chen felt a surge of cold fury, unlike anything he had experienced in his career. He remembered Heather's smug report in the cockpit, her talk of a discrepancy. It had all been a lie born of prejudice, which had led to this fiasco. Get me Heather Vance, Cynthia Hayes said, her voice like ice. Get her in this office, now! She then turned to Captain Chen. Captain, you need to find Dr. Williams. Find her, apologize profusely on behalf of this entire airline, and ask her whatever she wants. Because, as of this moment, she's the most important person on the eastern seaboard. The hunt was on. But finding Annalise was only the first step. After the public humiliation she had endured, the real question was, even if they found her, why in the world would she agree to help them? Annalise was sitting in the chaotic Global Atlantic Priority Lounge, a space that felt anything but a priority. She was on the phone with her company's head of legal, calmly and precisely detailing the incident with Heather. She had already received a flurry of texts from Robert Sterling, who had given her his personal number and assured her his firm would represent her pro bono if she wished. She wasn't thinking about lawsuits yet. She was just trying to process the raw, stinging humiliation of it all. Her keynote speech felt 1,000,000 miles away. Dr. Williams. She looked up. Captain David Chen was standing before her, his hat in his hands. His face was a mixture of exhaustion, stress, and profound embarrassment. Behind him, looking pale and terrified, was Heather Vance. Captain, Annalise said, her voice cool and guarded. She ended the call. To what do I owe the pleasure? Dr. Williams. Chen began, his voice heavy with sincerity. I am Captain David Chen. I was the captain of Flight 884, and I am here to offer you the most sincere, unreserved apology of my professional life. What happened to you on my aircraft was inexcusable, and it represents a catastrophic failure of judgment on the part of my crew, and ultimately on my part for trusting that crew member's report. He shot a look of pure venom at Heather, who flinched and stared at the floor. Annalise listened, her expression unreadable. An apology was expected, But this felt different. There was a desperate urgency in the captain's eyes. "The flight attendant," Chen continued, gesturing towards Heather, "has been suspended from duty pending a full investigation, which I assure you will be swift and thorough. Her report was based on falsehoods. We know that now." He paused, taking a deep breath. This was the hard part. "Dr. Williams. Annalise. We have another more immediate problem. One that is deeply, deeply embarrassing for us to admit. You see the technical fault that forced our return. It's with the FADEC control software on Engine 2. A flicker of understanding dawned in Annalise's eyes. She said nothing, letting him continue. "Our engineers are stumped." The captain confessed, the words clearly costing him his pride. "The engineers at Rolls-Royce are stumped. They told us the only person who could likely diagnose this specific fault is the system's lead architect. They told us that person was you." The silence that followed was charged with 1,000 unspoken things. Irony, karma, and the delicious, terrible weight of the moment. Annalise looked from the captain's pleading face to Heather's horrified one. Heather now understood. The woman she had belittled, harassed, and ejected the woman she deemed unworthy of her cabin was the very expert they were now begging for help. The color drained from her face, leaving a pasty, sickly white. Annalise finally spoke, her voice calm and measured. "And you want me to help you?" "We know we have no right to ask," Captain Chen said quickly. "After how you were treated, if you told us to get lost, no one could blame you. But we have 300 passengers stranded. The aircraft is grounded indefinitely. We are desperate." This was the moment. She could say no. She could walk away, savoring the perfect, brutal karma of it all. She could let Global Atlantic Airways wallow in the multi-million-dollar mess of their own, making a mess precipitated by the bigotry of their employee. It would be justice. But then she thought about the other passengers. The families trying to get home, the business people missing meetings, the vacationers whose trips were ruined. And she thought about the machine itself. Her machine. The elegant, complex system she had poured years of her life into. Leaving it broken felt like a betrayal of her own work, of her own professionalism. Her integrity was worth more than her anger. She stood up, her gaze fixed on the captain, completely ignoring Heather. "I will help," she said, "but not for the airline. I'll do it for the other passengers and for the integrity of the system I designed. However, there are conditions." "Anything," Captain Chen said, relief washing over his face. "First," Annalise said, her voice firm, "I will require a standard emergency consultation contract. My employer's rate is $5,000 an hour with a 4-hour minimum. You will route that through my company's legal department." "Done," the captain agreed without hesitation. "Second, I want a written formal apology from the CEO of Global Atlantic Airways, not a form letter, a personal one. It will be on your email before we even get to the plane," he promised. "Third," she said, and now she turned her head, slowly, her eyes finally locking onto Heather's. "I do not want her," she said, her voice dropping to an icy whisper, "anywhere near me or that aircraft. I want her escorted from the airport." Heather looked up, her eyes wide with panic and pleading, but Captain Chen simply nodded to an airline security manager who had been standing by. "You heard her. Ms. Vance's airport credentials are to be revoked immediately. Escort her out." 2 security officers stepped forward. "Ma'am, please come with us," one said softly. Heather stood frozen for a moment, her world crumbling around her. She had tried to eject Annalise from a seat, and in return, Annalise was having her ejected from her entire career. She shot Annalise a look of pure, unadulterated hatred before allowing herself to be led away, a silent, defeated figure disappearing into the terminal crowd. The first wave of karma had struck. Now it was time for Annalise to get to work. "Captain," she said, picking up her briefcase, "take me to my plane." Annalise Williams walked across the tarmac not as a passenger, but as the commander of the situation. The ground crew who had been briefed on who she was parted for her like she was royalty. Frank Miller, the lead maintenance tech, met her at the base of the A350's stairs, his expression a mix of awe and apology. "Dr. Williams, Frank Miller, it's an honor, and I'm sorry as hell for what happened." "Let's just fix the plane, Frank," Annalise replied, shaking his hand. She didn't go to the cabin. She went straight to the cockpit, a space she knew as well as her own living room. Captain Chen and the first officer gave her the command seat. She strapped herself in, and her fingers flew across the control panels, the muscle memory from thousands of hours in simulators taking over. "Okay," she said, her voice crisp and authoritative. "Power up the auxiliary systems. Give me the full diagnostic log for FADEC 2 from the last flight phase." The screen in front of her filled with lines of data and code. To the pilots, it was a confusing jumble. To Annalise, it was a story. She saw the initial fault, the resets, the mismatch. Her eyes scanned the data streams, her mind processing the complex interplay of thousands of variables. "There," she said after less than 5 minutes, pointing to a single obscure line of code. "That's your ghost." Frank and the pilots leaned in. "What is it?" Frank asked. "It's a rounding error in the thermal compensation subroutine," Annalise explained, her focus absolute. "When the engine was running at full takeoff power, the sensors got heat-soaked. On the climb out, as the external air temperature dropped rapidly, the primary sensor cooled a fraction of a second faster than the secondary sensor. The software is supposed to account for that, but there's a bug in a new patch. For a split second, the two channels read a temperature difference of 0.02 degrees, which caused a voltage discrepancy of 0.01 volts. It's an infinitesimal difference, but the system is so sensitive, it flagged it as a major mismatch and threw a fault. It was a brilliant instant diagnosis of a problem that could have taken a team of engineers days to find. "Can you fix it?" Captain Chen asked, his voice full of hope. "I can't rewrite the core code from here," Annalise said. "That requires a full maintenance patch from the manufacturer. But," she smiled for the first time, "I did build in a back door for exactly this kind of scenario. We can force the system to ignore that specific voltage flag. It's a temporary override, completely safe, but it will allow the FADEC to function normally until the plane gets to Frankfurt, where they can upload the new software." She talked Frank through the maintenance override procedure, a complex sequence of commands entered through the maintenance terminal in the electronics bay below the cockpit. 20 minutes later, Frank's voice came over the intercom. "Override engaged, Dr. Williams." On the cockpit screen, the angry amber FADEC 2 fault light blinked once, twice, and then extinguished. It stayed off. The system was green. The plane was fixed. A spontaneous round of applause broke out in the cockpit. Captain Chen shook his head in amazement. "Dr. Williams, I don't know what to say. Say you'll institute mandatory comprehensive bias and de-escalation training for all your cabin crews," Annalise said, unclipping her seatbelt. "And that you'll re-examine your complaints procedure so a passenger's word isn't automatically dismissed in favor of a crew member's." "I will personally champion it," Chen vowed. "You have my word." The flight to Frankfurt was reboarded 3 hours later. As Annalise walked back onto the plane, The first-class passengers who had witnessed the earlier incident stood up and began to applaud. The applause spread through the curtain to the rest of the plane as the story of what had happened circulated. Robert Sterling met her at her seat 2A with a broad smile and a handshake. The new flight crew treated her with a reverence usually reserved for royalty. The final reckoning for Heather Vance was brutal. Fired for cause, she was also blacklisted within the industry. With a formal complaint from Annalise, a damning witness statement from a high-powered lawyer like Sterling, and a scathing report from Captain Chen detailing how her actions had directly led to a major operational crisis. Her career in aviation was over. Global Atlantic settled with Annalise out of court for an undisclosed but reportedly substantial sum, which she promptly donated to a charity that supported women of color in STEM fields. The airline also made good on its promises. Annalise was given their highest level of lifetime elite status. The CEO's personal apology was lengthy and sincere, and a new mandatory training program, unofficially nicknamed the Williams Protocol, was rolled out across the entire company within 6 months. Annalise delivered her keynote speech in Frankfurt to rave reviews. As she stood at the podium, looking out at the brightest minds in her field, she knew the incident on Flight 884 would always be a part of her story. It was a painful reminder of the ugliness that still existed in the world. But it was also a powerful story of karma, a testament to the fact that sometimes the very person you try to cast down is the only one who can lift you up, and that true authority comes not from a uniform or a name tag, but from knowledge, integrity, and the quiet dignity of knowing your own worth. 1 year later, the polished stage was not in Frankfurt, but at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. The audience before Dr. Annalise Williams was not composed of her peers, but of hundreds of young women, high school and college students, attending the inaugural conference of the Williams Ascent Foundation. The foundation, funded entirely by her settlement from Global Atlantic, was dedicated to providing scholarships and mentorship for women of color pursuing careers in STEM. Annalise stood at the podium, no longer just an engineer, but a reluctant icon. The story of Flight 884 had, despite her desire for privacy, become an industry legend, a cautionary tale whispered in airline break rooms and a case study taught in corporate ethics seminars. She had learned to wield the unwanted fame as a tool. "A system," she began, her voice resonating with calm confidence through the auditorium, "is only as strong as its most vulnerable component. In an aircraft, we design for redundancy. We build backups for backups because we know that even the most robust design can have a hidden flaw. A single line of faulty code, a microscopic fracture in a turbine blade, if you don't have a protocol to handle that single point of failure, the entire system can be compromised." She paused, letting her eyes sweep across the rows of eager, intelligent faces. "The same is true of our social systems. The institutions we build, the companies we work for, the communities we live in. Prejudice is a fault code. Bias is a stress fracture. It introduces a critical point of failure into the human system. It tells you that someone's worth is less than your own, that their presence in a certain space is a discrepancy. It is a bug that can ground the most powerful enterprise." She never mentioned Heather Vance by name. She never had to. The story was the subtext for her new mission to create a world where no other brilliant young woman would ever have her legitimacy questioned on the way to claiming her seat at the table or on an airplane. The applause that followed was thunderous, not just for her technical genius, but for her resilience. Miles away at a gleaming new training facility near JFK, Captain David Chen, stood before a class of newly hired flight attendants. His hair had more silver at the temples now, but he stood taller. The incident had changed him, recalibrating his understanding of his own command. He had made good on his promise. "Your job," he told the recruits, "is to ensure the safety and comfort of every single person on that aircraft. And safety isn't just about oxygen masks and exit rows. It's about creating an environment of respect. The greatest threat to a flight isn't always turbulence. It's a breakdown in the chain of trust. Between the cockpit and the cabin, and between the crew and the passengers." He clicked to a new slide in his presentation. It was titled, "The Williams Protocol Beyond the Checklist." He told the anonymized story of Flight 884, framing it not as an HR issue, but as a safety issue. He spoke of how one crew member's personal bias created a distraction, eroded crew cohesion, and ultimately led to a multi-million-dollar operational crisis that could have been avoided by simple human decency. He made it clear that on his flights, and at this airline, there was zero tolerance for the kind of behavior that had grounded the spirit of innovation. The airline's customer satisfaction scores, especially among minority travelers, had seen a dramatic and sustained increase. Doing the right thing had also been very good for business. And what of Heather Vance? Her fall from grace was as swift and total as it was deserved. Blacklisted by major carriers, she found herself unemployable in the industry she had built her life around. The pride she had taken in her immaculate uniform and her authority over the gilded cage of first class was a distant memory. She now worked at a rental car agency at a suburban airport, the kind that serviced budget airlines. Her uniform was an ill-fitting polyester polo shirt. Her days were spent arguing with frustrated travelers over insurance waivers and fuel charges. She often saw the global Atlantic jets taking off, their sleek forms climbing gracefully into the sky, and her face would twist into a mask of bitter resentment. In her mind, she was the victim. She had been wronged by an overly sensitive passenger and a corporation that had bowed to public pressure. She never once considered that the fault lay within herself. Her world had not expanded with understanding, but had shrunk to the size of her own prejudice, a cramped and lonely space with no view of the sky. The plane had taken off without her. The story of Dr. Annalise Williams is a powerful reminder that prejudice and pride often come at a staggering cost. Heather Vance thought she was exerting control, but she was only exposing her own ignorance and setting the stage for her spectacular downfall. It's a jaw-dropping example of how karma can work in the most direct and ironic ways imaginable. What happened on Global Atlantic Flight 884 wasn't just about bad service. It was a battle of integrity versus intolerance, and in the end, brilliance and grace won out. If this story of justice served at 38,000 feet, shocked and inspired you, please hit that like button to show your support. Share this video with anyone who needs to hear that a person's value is never determined by someone else's prejudice. And don't forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss another story of unbelievable real-life drama and karma.